Hello, I'm joined here today with Charlie Dickey, who is a former board member and a current ambassador of Malaria Partners International. My name is Ariel Delaney, and I'm the Deputy Director of Malaria Partners International. And today we're going to be talking about the MPI Small Grants Program, which recently had a relaunch of our small grants application. And as such, we wanted to talk to the committee chair for small grants to learn more about this really important program and how your Rotary Club can get directly involved by applying for a small grant program, a small grant project. So I'm going to just hand over to Charlie and ask you to share a little bit more about yourself and then a little bit more background about this really cool program that Malaria Partners International has for small grants.
Well, thanks, Ariel, and thanks for helping put this on. I'm delighted to be part of the process. As Ariel, I think, mentioned, I'm a founding member of Malaria Partners International. I first joined the group. We started it in around 2013, so it's been almost 10 years. Made several trips to East Africa, including Tanzania and Uganda, to district conferences there, to projects, and sort of been buried in the process of small grants, really, formally and informally, since the beginning. I am a 20-year member of the Seattle Rotary Club in addition to that, and am active in both our Seattle club and obviously have been very active in the Malaria Partners International evolution.
So Charlie, can you share a little bit more about how this small grant program got started and what's overall the goal of this program?
Yeah, Ariel. Well, in the beginning, there was a lot of focus on large grants, and coincidentally, we are working on a very large grant in Zambia that we're a part of. And I thought it important to begin to sprinkle small grants, which are more readily accessible and available to more people and to more clubs and into more places, really, especially in the endemic world, and as another way to meet our mission. And our mission is very important to enunciate and to highlight throughout this, and that is to ignite a malaria fire, to eliminate malaria, just like we have modeled, just like Rotarians modeled in doing so with, as most of you know, polio, or nearly eliminating it. So with that same exuberance and that same spirit, we would do the same with malaria. And again, there's a large project effort, and there is now a small project effort. So that's the genesis.
Excellent. And before we kind of go through like what the process is for applying for a small grant, could you share with us who is an ideal candidate for these small grants?
Well, first and foremost, grants need to be applied for by a host club in an endemic area. Most of our activity, small grant wise, has been in sub-Saharan Africa, in places like Uganda, in East Africa, and in Zimbabwe, and in West Africa. We have one in the Gambia. We have one in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, among others. And so those are the kind of places where we are focused geographically. And the grants themselves, in terms of thresholds, economic thresholds, it's typically the maximum would be a $5,000 grant from MPI, but that is matched by our very generous partner, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has agreed to match us 1-for-1 dollars contributed to projects that in which we direct our funds to. So that would mean a $10,000 project budget. In addition, we look for a meaningful amount of contribution from the host club. That contribution can vary depending on, obviously, means and needs, but the bigger that contribution, the more it speaks to the project.
I know we're going to be sharing some information on projects that are underway or completed later on in this segment, but I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about what kinds of projects with the funding from these small grants, what kind of projects are funded for malaria prevention and elimination?
Well, it can certainly vary, Ariel. We see many projects that involve, like they do in the large projects, but on a much smaller scale, training of village health teams and community health workers who are engaged expressly to use best practices in testing and treating for malaria in their villages and hamlets. We see some projects, applications for bed net distributions. I have to quickly add on the bed net distributions, we are handing out a physical item, and oftentimes we look further for means of and ways to account for those items when they are distributed and after they are distributed. We do some publicity grants. We've done a few of those in West Africa where there's a blitz, a publicity blitz. There's radio, there's drama activities. There are major events surrounding Malaria Day, for example, where there is a need to get the word out for people to be mindful of malaria practices. So those are a few examples of projects which we have looked at and which we have funded.
Hello, I am Maureen Brotherton, and I live in Seattle, Washington, and I'm a part of Seattle Rotary 4 Club here in Seattle. And I'm also a board member at Malaria Partners International. It is my pleasure and great honor today to introduce someone that I'm working with, Martha Agwang, the current president of Rotary Club Bukadia in Uganda and the executive director of Uganda Youth Development Training Program. Hello, Martha.
Hello, Maureen. Thank you.
It's really good to have you here today. I have a couple of things that I'm going to do, and one is to introduce the club and your project. So yes. The Rotary Club of Bukadia is a young club, as I know it to be, and it's taken on a project that addresses reducing the prevalence of malaria in government schools, specifically P7, and it's because a lot of the government schools, P7, they board, and when they're boarding, they have to prepare for their exams after P7 to go to the next level, S1, for their education. And often with those schools, there is no malaria. I mean, there's no protection from malaria with nets and secure windows and such. So the boarding schools, where they sleep unprotected, the malaria rate is quite high. So the project, as I know, also focuses on sensitizing and prevention control in homes. Thus, it's really a big community effort, which is quite nice to have because that's what it takes to succeed. You had a pilot program, the Bukadia Rotary Club, where they tested and collected records on students and teachers in 3 schools, and that was before our funding. So we could see how the project worked and how effective it was. The rates dropped, the students were treated with Coritum, which they found to be very effective. And they're concerned about traveling home for holidays, because in Uganda, the kids go home for some time during the holidays, and they might pick it up again. And so they're tested when they return to school. The good thing is that the government has provided community with nets in homes. And so that's something that will be observed as this project goes on. The Malaria Grant includes nets, malaria tests, anti-malaria medicine, mosquito proofing for classrooms. Their goal is to lower the cases of malaria in the student population to 5% and stabilize as well as increase the school and community awareness of malaria and its prevention. So they're hoping that this will help, this project will spread through the government schools in Bucadia. Martha's Rotary Club is so committed to stay involved and make certain that Cortum is available as needed and the nets and the screened windows are maintained. The dedication that this club has shown to fight malaria is quite impressive. However, as we all know, the project was delayed for 2 years. And after the world's largest and longest school closure due to COVID and government lockdown, Bucadia schools are now finally back in session. And I believe so far you've tested and treated in 11 schools. So that's in a nutshell, a little background on this project. And so right now I have some questions for Martha. And the first being, Martha, what motivated your Rotary Club to apply for this grant?
Thank you so much, Maureen. Yeah, like Maureen said, my name is Martha Guang, the president of the Rotary Club of Bucadia. And we are really very grateful to our Malaria Partners International for the initiative. What motivated our club to apply for the grant, mainly the biggest was to improve on the health of the primary 7 pupils so that they can perform well to improve on their education. Because we realize that this class, a lot of it is needed, as in demanded from them. Remember, the rural community is different from the urban community. The urban child is taken care of very well, and therefore, yet they do the exam, the same exam with the rural child. And yet the rural child is living under very tough conditions. So we as a club sat down and looked at resources. They were not enough, and yet the goal was really quite good. The course was good. So when we looked around, we're like, let us look for like-minded organizations, partners, friends who can be able to support us in the cause. So the P7 children, why we chose P7? Because of the resources. Otherwise, it would roll out all the classes. But we said now that this is the most vulnerable class, being that they need good grades from them, and yet the conditions they are in are not good. The rooms they were sleeping were very open. The whole condition, no nets. So we said, let us seek for partners in this development course, and that's why we applied for the grant.
Yeah, I know I have visited schools in the north of Uganda before, government schools, and I was surprised at how unprotected the children were in a boarding school. And so, yeah, I totally understand the difference between the urban and the rural schools.
Yeah, but of course, also, Maureen, sorry to interject.
Go ahead.
Also, looking at the club, we are very small, like we are a club of, by the time we started the project, we were a club of 8 members, but now we are happy we are 10. So you can see that the number is really small and the resources they collect would not be able to do it. So we wanted to join hands together with the organizations that support the same cause, or have the initiative of developing the communities like rural areas of Bucadia. And of course, looking at the Bucadia rural community, it's so prone of malaria parasites. So many mosquitoes, everywhere is bushy, there is water management is not good, the housing itself is not good. So it was so prone to mosquitoes. So, and that's why the high malaria rate of malaria in the pupils, and not only pupils of P7, but the community as whole. In fact, last year we were ranked as Bucadia district, which was ranked the highest affected by malaria. So when we looked at that, even when the nets were given out, the net remains at home. The one the government has given the family remains at home with other children, and there's no for this child to carry back to school. So the conditions were really not good, and we had to think for another solution, and that's why we applied for the grant. Thank you so much.
Well,
yeah.
Your work is incredible. So what are you hoping to achieve at the end of the project? Will you just
Okay.
stop right after you've treated so many schools? I believe it's the goal was 100. I think there might be 50 that are government schools that are boarding or
Yeah. The government schools in total, there are 100, but out of the 100, only 50 have boarding schools. And you know, when they're in boarding, these children are together. And we looked at it like it's easy to control, like in terms of treatment, in terms of the nets available in the room, in terms of organizing the room. So it was really easy to at least organize the ones in boarding than the ones in day, because the ones in day, you have no control. What happens at home, we do not know. The housing, we do not know. The compound, we do not know. But at least when they are together at school, it is very easy to control. So what was our objective? I think one was to improve on the environment where these children study and sleep. That was one, and that's why the aspect of improving the rooms to make them mosquito proof, so that they are never accessed by mosquitoes. And then we treat them, test and treat. So we couldn't test and treat with the rooms which are prone to mosquitoes. We would look like we are not really doing anything. Otherwise, it will be replaced at the end of it all. So we had to first think of, okay, what is the environment? How are they living? How are they sleeping? How are they studying at night? And then afterwards, we went on testing them. The first results, in fact, they were really amazing. We were amused, because though we expected it, because the first pilot was giving us a very high, like 70%. But today, as I talk, we have 44%. So our goal of 5%, we hope we shall reach there. I know 44 is still high, but it's not, compared to the 70, it's some difference. The other thing was to improve on the health of these children and increase on their productivity. You know, when a child is sick, he cannot be productive. Neither can he be productive outside the class, neither inside the class, because all the time he will be sleepy, all the time he will be very busy, because the malaria in them affects even from their brains. So therefore, this child can't think, cannot read properly. Even when they go at home, they would spend weeks at home because they are sick. They would never report to school. Yeah. So that was also one of the objectives. We're like, let's improve on their health so that we improve on the productivity of this child, performance in class, as well as the performance outside class. Also, the other objective was to influence the policy makers. You know, these are the people who make policies for issues to change in communities. So in our working, we involved them into being our stakeholders. We had, yes, our club members as stakeholders, we had the pupils of the school, we had the management of the school, but also there were health officers. We could give them this data so that they base on it in order to decide for the communities. And that was the I think, objectives we looked at. We're like, let's get a structure that will remain visible even after the project. Yeah. So the other thing was to create awareness on malaria. You know, when we looked at the community, there was this mindset that looked at malaria like it was not a serious thing at all. Because someone would feel headache and be like, okay, let me take Panadol, and Panadol is just a painkiller, but does not remove the real virus. So you find they take Panadol for one day, and the next day someone looks okay, and she thinks she's okay. So the community itself, we needed to sensitize the community that the more you give in just painkillers, the more you are accelerating these parasites. One day they will just pop and you are down. So awareness creation was one of the biggest objectives we looked at. The other thing, of course, was to create a long-term infrastructure and a big force of minded organizations that will help into creating a movement that will help us fight against malaria. And of course, with a collective kind of participation, we hope that one day Bukedia will be malaria free. Yeah.
So Martha, is it difficult to sensitize or educate the parents?
Exactly, because these are people, most of them, like, let me say, the rural community, 80% of them have not gone to school. 80% of them are living in rural poor conditions. You find at times they even don't have just a simple radio that could connect them to listen to news. So therefore, you have to find them in the schools, like the parents. And remember, not all parents in that community have children in those schools. Some of them have, and chances for these ones that have children at school who have had the information to take it out is totally different. Yeah, few will speak out it, but a few may quite ignore. So it's a gradual process, but we hope with the time it will catch up. And what we have started, of course, that explains the reduction in the numbers. Most of the parents are now waking up to say, hey, does malaria also kill? In fact, one parent asked the team that, excuse me, I thought we are fighting AIDS and HIV. How come malaria is becoming an issue here? So you can imagine, so even the mindset, they look at malaria as the simplest kind of illness where you can walk with. So we told them, yes, you can walk with, but inside you, it's affecting your liver, it's affecting your organs, it's affecting your brain. And in the long run, someone starts urinating blood, like urine that looks like blood, and is like, oh, I am bewitched. In most cases, they would say they are bewitched. So it's only medical doctors or medical personnel to explain to them that this process started all the way from the simple malaria you used to have, and you poor treatment about it, because when you give painkillers, you are treating it poorly. So in the long run, it will turn to be a very dangerous one. Yeah, so it's a challenge, but we hope it will work.
Well, I think you are incredible. Your club's incredible. You're passionate about accomplishing this, and we love working with you. I think we've probably come to the end of our time, but do you have anything you want to add? I don't want to go. We finally met.
Okay. Maybe the lessons we've learned, that, like I've already mentioned, one of difficulty now in trying to sensitize the parents about the malaria, but we hope also gradually they will get into it. But the other thing we looked at is the involvement of all the club members in the project. Now, like other projects, it was very difficult. Like we had a project on operating children with quinine problems. Of course, we would look at only doctors and nurses, and club members were like, where do we participate from? And they are willing. But with the malaria project, members are really enthusiastic and they're all involved into the project. The other thing that we were so surprised is the collaboration between the parents and the schools. Initially, they would just send children to school, go to school, and the parent doesn't appear until the term is over. The child keeps going. They don't know whose child, who is the mother. But since the project started involving the parents into malaria project, they are all in touch with their school. They love their school. Now they see the value of the school. And that is one thing that we are really happy about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Well, I just want to, I hope you have some other projects online, and I'm sure that people will get behind your club just because you are so committed. And again, you're a pleasure to work with.
Yeah, most of them at first, they didn't know what Rotary was doing, but by involving them into malaria project, in fact, it created a link between our club and the community. Yeah, usually we would operate those that their illness, there are few operations, and noticing our presence in the area was very difficult. But now when we go sensitizing them in schools, sensitize the parents in schools, they're like, what is Rotary in fact? And that's why we now have numbers coming and most teachers are joining the club. Yeah, as I talk now, we are 10 registered, but already we have 5 potential that want also to register. So we hope that with our engagement with the community, and in fact, it is malaria project that has given us a hand to really intermingle with the communities, interact with them. We are really very grateful. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we're holding hands across the globe. It's Malaria Partners International and Rotary Club Bucadia and the Rotary clubs in Holland. You know, the Dutch. So we all are working on this project and others, of course, but this particular project. So thank you, Martha.
Thank
I wish
you
I
too.
could
You're
give
welcome.
you a proper greeting.
Thank you so much too. And thank you so much. Please take our greetings to Malaria Partners International team that we are very grateful. Yeah, the other, and what I love about the grants, yes, a dollar counts for us because with the community approaches, a very small thing can create a very big impact. That is what we realized. $1 can create a very good big thing in the community. It is so valuable for us. Any small dollar, whether $1, it's so valuable to us.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rotarian Masha. Good. Hello, all Rotarians. My name is Sarah Tembedza. I sit on a malaria board for the Methodist Church in Zimbabwe, and I've been running with the program for the last 4 years, and that is what drove me to experiment with the MPI small grants, and it became a success. I'm also working with the Zimbabwe chapter of the Rotary Club, Rotary clubs who are working on the malaria issues together with Rotarian Sam. I think that's all about me.
Thank you. So yeah, with that, we'll just delve into if somebody can give a brief summary of the situation of malaria. We obviously know malaria is a big issue in all of Southern Africa. And Rotarian Temba, I know you had given some documentation that you're working with in the past with the ministry. Can you please just give us a synopsis of sort of the state and the landscape of, as far as malaria is concerned?
Thank you very much once again. So we have, since we touched base with Masha, that's circa 2017, 2018, we have been in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Child Welfare, where there is, there's a unit that deals with malaria. It's called the National Malaria Control Program. It's headed by a doctor by the name Dr. Joseph Merikunashi. So prior to COVID, we're getting regular, in fact, weekly stats on malaria, on the new cases and fatalities and all that. But unfortunately, that hasn't been happening. And in fact, I'm supposed to be, I'll be close to their offices tomorrow, and hopefully I'll be able to check on what's happening. So Zimbabwe, in the past, Zimbabwe had succeeded or had made reasonable, good strides in addressing the issue of malaria. But unfortunately of late, the cases have peaked again. This is more prevalent. In fact, the province where malaria is most prevalent is Manicaland, which is on our border with Mozambique. So despite this being an area with where the altitude is high, there are areas which are on the lee side of the mountain ranges. Areas like for instance, like Nyanga, Nyamaropa, Chipinge. All those areas are malaria prevalent areas. Then we also have areas in the Zambezi Valley, and this includes areas like Mudzi, where our colleagues from Asasa successfully carried out the project. So you're talking of areas like Mzarabani, Kariba, and what have you, areas which are in the Zambezi Valley, which is obviously low-lying. And of late, there's also been a surge in the malaria cases in parts of Masvingo. Like there's a huge dam called Tokemkosi there, which is upon completion, I think it's going to be the largest inland dam in Zim. So areas like Chiredzi, where there's a lot of sugar growing activity, are also malaria prevalent areas. So you know that say around 1990, the time that I was in high school, malaria was more prevalent in the areas that are lower lying. So for instance, Haradia was not a malaria endemic area. So now, partly because of issues to do with climate change and global warming, you find that areas that where malaria was not endemic are now reporting cases of malaria. So it remains Africa's biggest killer disease, way ahead of AIDS and any other that you can think of. The last time I checked my stats, we were looking at something like 3,000 deaths per year. 3,000 deaths per day. So it's, no, it's not 3,000. Actually, you're looking at something like at least 3 million or 3 to 6 million deaths, which are occurring. But of course, like I said, the stats are subject to review once I reconnect with the National Malaria Control Program. So we have serious challenges in that regard. I'll take the Zambezi Valley as an example. There's a lot of movement there because you find there's some communal farmers that prefer to farm in the Zambezi Valley because it's the soil, the alluvial soil there is very rich. They don't even need to apply fertilizer. So from a farming perspective, it's very good. But again, those are the areas where malaria thrives most. And for such a demographic, it's very difficult to control malaria because these are people who are always on the move. They are moving from point 1 to point 2. The area is also very sparsely located. There are no service provision is very, very basic. You find it's actually difficult to travel to those areas. So again, even the Minister of Health and Child Welfare personnel going to some of the areas where need is where there's more need is a challenge because of the logistical challenges that they face. They have to use 4x4 vehicles, and in some cases, there have been some that they got from partners. I know in one year the Global Fund facilitated the purchase of some off-road vehicles for malaria control. But as you are aware, cars are subject to wear and tear, and once they break down, you have all those issues. So it has been a challenge, particularly in the areas that I've mentioned. As far as are concerned, the one where, in fact, Moods at one time was the most malaria endemic district in Zimbabwe. So again, there have been changes, you know, our with durations as far as weather is concerned. In very good rainy seasons, it obviously means there's going to be a surge as far as malaria cases are concerned. Like this year, of course, in as much as the rains were erratic in some places, but in those areas where malaria is a problem, there have been significant rains, so which again points to the surge in malaria. So normally, as we approach winter, right now we are approaching winter. Malaria prevalence tends to subside a bit because the breeding areas are the weather condition is not very conducive for malaria breeding. So thank you very much, Marsha, for all your sterling efforts in pulling in us getting this revitalized, because now is actually the best time for us to start preparing for the next malaria season, which will start around about call it August, September, once we're past winter. But let me hasten to say that we have serious malaria issues. They might not be, the prevalence might not be as bad as Zambia, but it's still there. We still have malaria challenges. And also because the thing of budgetary constraints on the part of the ministry, you find that most of our our disease control programs are actually funded from external funders. So it's always going to be a challenge as far as malaria is concerned, particularly in areas where people are very itinerant. I think with that, I've given much of a synopsis of the malaria situation, but in due course, like following my visit tomorrow, I'll be able to get more up-to-date stats from the National Malaria Control Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Rotary and Temba. And yeah, those statistics and the data are very important when we talk of small grants within the applications. And in general in really being able to get the funding, because that's what the donors and our side, they want to see those statistics. So we need to always make sure that the stats are very accurate and available. So with that, thank you. And I was born in Mutare. My roots are in Chipinge area. So all those areas you talked about are near and dear to my heart. I'll move over to Rotarian Sarah, if you are ready to come back. And let's talk specifically about the small grant for the Musasa project and how that came about. So I do know some background that, you know, I on my visits to Zimbabwe, and after I'd gone for the conference in Malawi a few years ago, I visited with a few of the clubs and was doing some outreach and sharing information about the small grants. So I've met some of you face to face within some of that outreach work. Rotarian Sarah, can you just give us a synopsis of the work that was done in the Musasa project and the goals, and you know, what was the intention of that project?
Thank you, Masha. The background, maybe let me just say how I came to start working on this project. It's actually one of the motivators that made me join the Masasa Club, or just to be a Rotarian. I was invited to speak on malaria by Rotarian Sam. And when we went with him to Mudzi, that's when we realized that we could actually apply. Coincidentally, at that time, that's when MPI flighted a small grants application. And we said, okay, let's give it a try. And through your support, Masha, we then managed to go. It was a lot of back and forth because this was the first. And I think halfway through, I almost gave up because there were lots of changes and some of the information I didn't quite understand or have, because this is not like my everyday kind of work. But I'm glad that eventually we managed to go through the process. When we went in, our main objectives were to complement the efforts that were being made by Methodist Church in Zimbabwe, as well as the main funder, who is also in New York, is the Flowers. The main objective of the other two partners is to change behaviors through evangelism, because they realize that when people go to church, they are given positive messaging, and that usually helps them to change their behaviors. So with the amount of grant we had, we realized, okay, we could play our part. So we targeted buying malaria kits. And this is something we had done before, the year before. I think maybe 6 months before we started applying for this grant, Masasa Club had donated a few kits, testing kits, to the same program, the Methodist is the Flowers. So we then bought, offhand, I'm forgetting, but I'll give you as we go through the conversation. But we managed to buy, okay, 4,250 test kits, which then were given to the program managers. We also managed to train, since we're getting into behavior change program, we managed to get to I think it's about 42 village health workers trained. They were certified, and the Masasa Club actually took a day out to be with these village health workers and the community, made up of village health headmen and district health workers and so on, and we handed over the kits. This has seen an impact, positive impact, in terms of increased early treatment, because what we realized is that there was a shortage of kits. And unfortunately, with COVID, there was a time when the village health workers could not distinguish between COVID symptoms and malaria symptoms. So it sort of affected the speed at which those who were affected by malaria could be saved. So apart from the malaria kits, we also donated sanitizers. We also donated some masks to the village health workers. So the other positive impact was that there was early detection of these signs and symptoms, you know, and then the other one is the availability of the test kits also helped the team to identify hotspots through a proper case management as quick as possible. However, the challenges that we faced or that are still being faced by the program is that we had one main donor towards residual, they call it indoor residual spray. They pulled out, and it made the October spray season a bit of a challenge, but unfortunately we couldn't apply as quickly as we would have to sort of close the gap. And it remains a challenge because it was handed back to the government. And we know that the government may not have the full funds for the indoor residual spray. So if we are to apply for funding, it's one of the areas that we need to cover as the Rotary Club members. And then we also, because of the limited grant, we would then only manage to train village health workers in 4 wards instead of 6 wards in Mudzi. And also the test kits are not as many as we wanted. So I think going forward, we just recommend that depending on the cake or the size of the fund, we look at bicycles so that the village health workers can move with ease to support the community, also be a part of the indoor residual spray efforts, as well as awareness, because we are focusing on changing behaviors. Media awareness is not as what we would want, because I'm assuming if we had billboards, if we had radio sessions and things like that, and just a lot of this social media messaging, we would actually win the battle, because the target is to get to 5 per 1,000 in eradicating malaria. I think that's the feedback I can share, Masha.
Thank you, Rotarian Sarah. And as you're speaking, I'm hearing multiple small grants that can be applied, because the way these programs are initiated is by you on the ground applying. And so all those things that you mentioned, media, bicycles, the need for transportation, they are being funded in other geographies. And so we encourage you to keep applying. And like you said, the process is very rigorous, but it's important to make sure that we are thorough. Like I said, if the data is not enough with what is needed, because we also have to show to the donors, and we have to make sure that we have full accountability and full documentation to be able to approve those funds. So most of that is really necessary. So I'm glad you hung in there and we got that completed and successfully. And I think we've been able to cover a lot of areas that we were planning with regards to the background and what was accomplished with the Musasa project. And then also just some of the challenges that are being faced. So, and that was really what we were trying to cover for this discussion. So at this point, I'll just close by saying, I appreciate all of you, and more information will be provided on the small grants, the changes going forward. Like I said, the application will now be online, so it'll be easier for you to access and to be able to apply. And Ariel, if you want to advance the pictures just to show the other slides, there are some of the pictures with the test kits being handed over in the Mudzi district and the village health workers that were being trained. And those are some of the Rotarians from Musasa project. And the bishop was also present during that handover. And then there's been some subsequent follow-up pictures and reports on the village health workers at work following that handover. So again, the burden is great, the need is great, but for us to be successful in assisting and helping in the goal of eliminating malaria, we depend on you as Rotarians who are there in Zimbabwe to be sending in these applications so that MPI is able to have you being the worker bees on the ground helping us with this work and getting it to the people that need the help. So with that, we'll go ahead and close. I appreciate all of you, and I look forward to meeting as things have opened up. We can be meeting more and meeting some of our board members on MPI. Some of them will be traveling to Zimbabwe and to Zambia in the near future. And we look forward to working together more and really helping towards eliminating malaria. Thank you.
Can we just walk through the process of what it takes to apply for one of these grants?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
And since we've recently relaunched the application itself, can you share with us a little bit about what that process looks like? And I can share because I know it's on our website as you're speaking, but can you walk us through that?
Yeah, just to start off, we have now a digitized application form. Before this, it was just kind of an email with a big attachment. What we want to do is be able to capture certain key elements of the application, location and numbers of people affected, and the dollar amounts or the local currency amounts, and quantitative aspects of the application, which we can use and track as we develop the process and develop our grant making process, and as we communicate to our funders, which are largely grantors outside, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but we have many individual contributors that like to know who, where, and what. So it is a digitized process to help us communicate with them. The application itself is divided up into really three parts. The contact details, like you'd expect on any application that you all fill out in your lives, and then a description of the project itself, project description, followed by a project details, followed by the economics or the budget to the product to it. So those are the sort of 3 or 4 parts of the application itself. The very top of the application is I don't know if it's there, but it certainly is there on the website. It's not at the top of this. Is yes, there it is in blue, is our mission. And all those that are filling out this application need to be mindful that that's really what the driver is here. So the more that the application can do in all its pieces to illuminate that, to highlight that, to emphasize that, it'll come through much more loud and clearly to those who are reviewing it. So with that, I've already explained some of the pieces, the first part there. The contact details are basically the names and places where the project is going to take place. Further down in details is some declarations we expect grantees to make, promising that they are a club in good standing. For example, they will agree to, at the end of the day, fill out a memorandum of understanding that includes having a separate bank account for the project itself.
Can you just share, Charlie, why is that important that we have these memorandums of understanding with the partner clubs?
Yes, memory is a funny thing, and when we get into the project, sometimes we forget that we've made promises, commitments to do certain things. Perhaps they're post-action. In other words, they will do things after the project is finished. It's easy to forget those kinds of commitments that have been made going into this. The idea that who's going to put money into the account first. We do expect that the host club will put its commitment into its bank account first, and then we will follow with our commitment immediately thereafter. So it's really just to make sure we have an operating document that we can always go to when we're executing the project itself and following the project. But I should also quickly point out that all the projects need to have a post-action report following the project itself, and that should be submitted within 60 days of its completion. So that's another thing that's expressly outlined in the MOU.
So what's the typical duration then of a project, since that with that requirement being known?
Well, the typical duration of a project, we have funded projects that last as short as 10 days, all the way up to, I think we've got even one that's going to be moving along for about 3 years.
Wow.
So obviously, the longer the project, the more the need for an MOU that we can always go back to and relate to what we agreed to. And as you all know, people change roles, and the person that started the project isn't the same person that finishes it. And so that's the kind of thing that needs to be well documented. The projects need to be well documented through the MOU.
Excellent. And then is there, in terms of the application process, how long does that take after a club will go on this website and fill out an application?
Well, so we have a quarterly cycle we're trying to adhere to. The quarters aren't the calendar quarters. They are January 31st, April 30th, July 31st, and October 31st. And these are the dates in which we formally will look at new applications. And I mean by formally look at, the application needs to be to us by that date. Depending on how thorough and complete and thoughtful it is, it will depend on how quickly we can get to it to review it. If it's very, very much all those, we might get to it as soon as a week or two. By we, I mean, we have a committee of volunteers at MPI who have agreed to serve on the committee, the reviewing committee, small grant. We call ourselves a small grant committee, which I chair. And we normally, I'd say 50% of the grants will need some work after they are received by the representative. So that might take as long as a month.
Okay.
And then, in which case, we will meet again at the end of that month, and hopefully process the application through committee. And once it's through committee, we recommend approval at our board meeting, which is held monthly at the beginning or near the beginning of each month. So the typical period of waiting and review would be a month to 2 months.
Excellent. And then as I look at this application, I see there's required questions about folks benefiting directly and indirectly. And if ever, as a Rotary Club is preparing their application, how do they go about actually identifying what numbers are there and confirming if those are indeed the correct numbers to be putting down? Yeah,
so I mean, it can vary. Let's look at the direct beneficiary for a second. If it's a bed net project, and that's the one that's presented to us, obviously you need to look at the number of people that you expect to be sleeping under bed nets, and that's a pretty easy number, I would guess, to determine. If it's a publicity campaign, you need to think about how the reach of the radio station. How many can you get data on how many would be expected during the time that the promotions would be aired, that would be listening. If there's a huge billboard, how many people would drive by it? Those are the indirect beneficiaries. If it can be a combination. It could be a test and it could be a village health team training exercise. And so the project is all about the training. Then obviously the direct beneficiaries are the trainees themselves, but then indirectly they're going to be reaching out into the communities and connecting with populations of people, and a best estimate of the number of people from an indirect standpoint that those people would touch would be a number that would go into the indirect category.
Those are great examples, Charlie. And in terms of outputs, like the overall outcomes to be sustained over time, how does the committee receive those answers from Rotary clubs? What are you looking for when you see the question on that long-term sustainability?
Yeah, well, sustainability to us, and certainly to me, means what impact will the project have on its intended population following its conclusion. I'll have to say, in the beginning, I remember I was involved with a project which was just a treatment program, and it wasn't very sustainable, although it did connect a lot of, it did impact a lot of lives. Conversely, if a program is about teaching people best practices, that kind of educational preventative approach can have a much more sustainable impact over a longer period of time. And so that's kind of what needs to be addressed here. What impact will this project have once it concludes in the population to which it's directed?
Excellent. And I guess I just have one regarding the application. It'd be good to have some insight on, from your opinion, on the funding and the budget section for applicants. Like, what requirements are we really looking for in the budget?
That's a good question, Ariel. Truth be told, when I first receive an application, perhaps before I even read the first line, is I look for its budget. The budget communicates a lot. It communicates to me how much thoroughness the applicant has leaned into it. How much is there supporting documents that support some of the line items, especially on the more significant costs involved, if it involves treatments, if it involves tests, test kits, certainly if it involves bed nets. It does help to have some evidence that of what the source of the cost is. And so the more of that, the better. And it is basically our roadmap to how we're going to allocate a scarce resource, in this case, money. And so how that is done is very important to us and gets a good look. In addition to that, and is not only how it's going to be expended, how the money is going to be used, but we would like to know the sources of funds. This is also put into the same section, and the reason why it's put in twice is because we can extract the digital data from the application itself, but we also would like to see it in a spreadsheet form as a separate attachment. So we see here, as you put up, both the uses, the expenses, and the sources of funds that needs to be explicit.
Oh, this is very helpful, Charlie. And I clicked on that link which is embedded within the application, just to show folks that there is a sample as well to look for. That link right here for how to submit.
Yeah, and I'd just add that I realize that that's kind of an abbreviated form that you have there. We, in most cases, in most projects, look for a significant amount of detail in the expense side of the presentation.
And then any other, it says here, other documentation that would be useful for, what kind of examples do you have of what clubs have submitted in the past that have been, additional documentation that's been helpful for the committee in deciding the fate of a grant application?
Well, there are a lot of things. This is kind of an important catch-all. One of the things, I don't know if you, Ariel, plan to discuss this, but one of the things it's important, in addition to obviously the economics of the project, is the need. And the need sometimes can't just be expressed in terms of, well, we need 1,000 bed nets, or we need 500 test kits. It needs to be expressed in terms of, what is malaria doing to this place? What is malaria? What is the prevalence rate? Is the problem that the hospital or the medical facility receiving too many visits? Is it mortality? And the focus is almost always in these grants on infants, in other words, under 5-year-olds and pregnant women. Those, as most people in the endemic world know, are the most seriously impacted by malaria. So anything that documents existing conditions, statistically, data, quantifiably in those regards, is important to add here. In addition to that, documents that show photos of where and who is important, and in short videos, the space doesn't allow for long videos. Place to put sources, costing sources for your line items, important line items in your expense budget, is another place you can insert them.
Excellent. And then a few final questions for you. If a grant is approved, what happens immediately after the approval for the Rotary Club?
Well, some people think that, Ariel, that you're 99% done once you got approval. We've discovered that the hurdles in the the money transfer portion of this can be difficult. In the MOU, we have an exhibit which is, we think we've got everything covered from a money transfer standpoint. It usually is missing something. So people have to be patient about that. We have to make sure that the monies from the host club are put into the account. The account has to be established first, and the like. So it can be done quickly, but sometimes it can take as long as 2 or 3 weeks to sort through that process.
And then once the grants get underway, what's the expectation of, you mentioned reporting at the very end, is there expectation of any mid project reporting?
There's never, we never can receive too many photos of projects. There are certain photos that mean more to us than others. I should point out photos that include action as opposed to team pictures. Team pictures are fine, but we also like to see people doing the work. Even better when we see Rotarians doing the work. Remember, and I can't emphasize this enough. The mission is to ignite a fire under Rotary to eliminate malaria. So any photos, short videos that can do that are precious to us, and we would love to have.
And then a note on rejected applications. For those who are not successful, are those applicants, do they receive feedback, and are they encouraged to apply again?
It's always difficult to turn down an application. As a matter of course, we'll look at as a matter of process, really, when an application arrives, I will give it kind of what I call the smell test. Does it just kind of measure up before I assign one of our volunteers to go deeper into it? I won't do a lot of active diligence on it. I will just kind of look at it, and I might get back to somebody and say it needs beefier information in these areas, and it won't be assigned. So it'll just hang in the winds until we receive that information. We don't have a formal process for rejecting them as yet, but as this is a competitive process, and we are beginning to receive more applications than we can fund. And to the extent that that happens, we will probably be ending up formalizing more of a rejection process, regret process, as we roll along. And you had mentioned aerial reporting. We don't have, the MOU will cover the needed reports at the moment. And we are building, the next phase of our growth cycle is to put in place some digitized templates that grantees can use for both interim reportings as necessary, and certainly post-action reports.
The program has definitely evolved and is going to continue to evolve. Did you have anything final you wanted to share about the program?
No, the small grants program, I think you can almost scroll right down to the bottom of it, Ariel. It's got frequently asked questions and answers. So please feel free to go to that if I missed anything or you need amplification on anything that I've submitted here. And it's got a contact address that you can reach out to us if you've got questions. Realize that we're a volunteer organization, and we're trying to do the best we can, always trying to do the best we can. We're evolving as an entity. I stressed earlier the idea that statistics that show need in a community are important, in which we can measure the success of the project against. In some ways, there's no failures in this world. If properly documented, all projects don't always end up in the success column. But if we know why they're not successful, that's is equally as informative to us, and we can better our process as we go along and make for better small granting.
Absolutely.
So I can't overemphasize that again, but we can't kind of embark down that road unless we have good data about the community and its needs in terms of malaria prevalence or hospital visits or mortality and the like up front, so we can measure how the project performs against those dashboards.
And as you had mentioned earlier on this page here, our small grants page, we have a reel at the bottom from our blog for those applicants that are interested in looking at other projects that have been funded and seeing what updates are there. We frequently will include them in our monthly newsletter, as well as on our blog on the website. So I would encourage applicants as well to look at some of those past successful projects to get an idea of some of the funding available and what are the various options out there.
Exactly.
Excellent. And then I like to notice that this is on our front page of our website, that we have actually shared how much we funded to date and what countries we've awarded small grants to. So on this last note, Charlie, what do you envision the future of this program to be?
Well, our future will depend to some extent or large extent on continuing investment by our funding partners, which, as I said, includes not only the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also a number of individuals, mostly Rotarians, who have also contributed to the ability of us to make small grants. And you, the grantees, in giving us thorough and thoughtful, as we've described, applications that can have distinct measures of success that we can communicate back to our partners and find new partners because they're well documented. So we're all part of the process of success. And the more of all that, the more grants that we will be able to make. As you alluded to in the very beginning of this, it's sort of been a two-step process as far as small grants. We had kind of an informal process until about 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't know the exact number of grants that we made, but I'm guessing they were probably on the order of 10 to 15. And since we've formalized the process, there's about, I think there's about 20 to 20 grants that we've either have finished or about to be in the approval process, or are underway, or we've completed.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Charlie, for your time today. Hopefully this video is really informative for potential applicants and those who just want to learn more about our program.
Thanks, Sarah. It's been my pleasure.